Well, happy Thursday. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Insights and Analytics. Where's my banner? I don't remember what we are today. We are the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. This is how you know it's actually live. Oh, my goodness. Well, welcome. I am joined by Chris and John today. We are talking about an introduction to natural language processing. So we're talking about this just to sort of give you a feel for what Chris will be talking about at MACON, which is the Marketing AI conference. It's completely virtual this year. It's September 13th and 14th. So you can go to marketingaiinstitute.com and learn more about that. Our friends over there. And I think Chris and you and I both have discount codes. So if you're interested in signing up for their conference or Chris's session, then just let us know and we can provide that information for you. So, anywho, in talking about natural language processing, people generally have a lot of questions. What is it? How do I use it? So today we're going to talk about the basics, technologies that currently perform natural language processing. So things that you may already have in your MarTech stack and common marketing applications. So knowing not just what it is, but what to do with it, which is the so what portion of the show. So Chris, what is natural language processing?
Well, let's do this. Before we get into what is it, let's talk about why anyone should care about it. Because as much as I love to sit here and just foam at the mouth endlessly about all the cool technology, most people don't have that same compulsion. Katie, something that you've said I think is really important is that data isn't just numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we think about, let's see if we can bring this up here. Oh, look at that. That's pretty cool. Let's do this one.
I was going to say, but you cut out me and John. That's not cool.
If we think about, let's say, a very popular thing in consulting these days, the voice of the customer, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's in the voice of the customer? Right? You have your major categories like advertising and marketing and PR, sales, customer service. But then there's all these, I guess, channels or modalities or methods that we would talk to customers and more importantly, listen to what customers had to say. And so if we think about the voice of the customer, on the left-hand side is all that data, right? Chatbots, CRM data, emails, focus groups, your customer service inbox. You know, the list is extensive. And to your point, Katie, not a lot of this data is numeric, right? In fact, very little of it is numeric. And yet a huge amount of it is really valuable, right? So think about what's in your customer service inbox. When people are reaching out to you, it's generally not because they're bored. I mean, maybe it is, but probably not. It's generally because they got some kind of problem. And you would be well served to A, pay attention to your customers, and B, get an understanding of what it is they're complaining about, what is that they need help with. And you can't do that because what's in your customer service inbox really is just a big pile of text. And so we care about natural language processing because we're sitting on so much of this stuff. We've got emails coming out the wazoo. We've got reviews, right? There's as everyone who's set up a Google My Business page knows, it's almost all text. There's very few things that are not text there. The tweets and social media posts that we deal with, even in SEO, right? I know a lot of folks spend a lot of time in SEO, but even SEO data is a substantially language, right? What is natural language processing? How does it work? How to learn it? These are all these different things. And the best example I can give of the importance of natural language is, and I want you and John to try and guess this. Here is the quantitative data only. What is this? This is a recipe.
I was going to say, it's a recipe.
Let's see. Cups, tablespoons, teaspoons. So it's something you're baking.
Uh-huh.
So it's some sort of like a bread or a cake, probably. I'm going to go with some sort of a cake with a frosting.
Okay. Yeah, all right, she's going with that. I'm going with 10 pieces. So I'm going to say it's cupcakes.
Cupcakes. Okay. Okay. You're correct that it is a baked good of some kind, right? It's Boston cream pie.
So it's
This
a
is what-
cake with stuff.
10
a cake with-
pieces. That's not a pie at my house. That's for sure.
So where's my pie? Do I
Yeah,
win?
that's like four pieces.
So what you're saying, John, is at the next company outing, everyone has to bring their own pie.
Yeah, right. It's like we got 8 pies, 1 for everyone and 7 for John.
But you can see how the qualitative data, the language, the words make a huge difference, right? This is not helpful, even though it's all numbers. And as somebody who likes numbers and likes working with numbers, I'm a big fan of them, but it's not enough, right? We need that language in order to make sense of it. And obviously doing this with the recipe part itself would just be silly. So why we care about NLP is because we are sitting on a gold mine of stuff, right? We've got so much rich stuff. And if we think about marketing analytics as data only, as numbers only, I should say, then it's like bringing a kid's shovel to the gold mine. You'll get some gold, maybe, particularly if it's one of those things that's set up for kids, but it's not going to be the most effective. So that's why we care about this stuff. Let's talk about what it is. Fundamentally, under the hood, natural language processing is about getting machines to process language in ways that it can be used for one of two tasks, either classification or prediction. So if you get a big pile of text, you want to classify it and say, okay, what were the words used? What were the sentences used? Things like that. And prediction is, okay, given a series of data points, what's the next one? When people ask, it's like the most simplified explanation possible, it's this, right? It's turning one into the other. If you can do this, you're doing natural language processing, right?
But you're doing it manually is the problem.
A lot of people do it manually, and that's fine if you have like one document. When you have dozens or hundreds or thousands or millions of documents, then you start running into scaling issues. There's simply not enough time in the day or people to be able to do that. Now, here's the important thing that people miss. Machines can't read. Right? Machines cannot comprehend. They cannot understand what it is they're reading. If you go to the most advanced systems out there, like the GPT transformers, and you type in the sentence, not the numbers, but the sentence, 2 + 2 =, and you say predict, every one of us is going to say the next word's 4. The machine, in a lot of cases, when we try this, doesn't do that. It spits out something completely different because it has no comprehension. It has no understanding of what it's reading. All it is doing is statistical probability guessing, saying that the probability of the next word in the sentence is this, and it doesn't know what it's reading. So one of the most important, I guess, warnings about natural language processing is that the machines don't understand what they're saying. Even if it feels like they do, they don't actually understand anything.
And I think, that's a really, we've talked about this and joked about it a lot, that the machines aren't really sentient. They're not making decisions based on information they don't have. So if you have never given it examples of 2 + 2 = 4, it's not going to guess 4. You have to feed that information into it. And so, Chris, to your point, when we talk about this, on a different topic of like ethics and bias in AI, it can only feed back to you what you feed into it. So, there have been really bad examples of AI bots on social media that have gone poorly because they are just replicating the information they've been given. They're not making decisions going, oh, I'm going to use my judgment and say that's probably, not a politically correct or a racist comment. So I'm not going to say that. It's going to say, well, this is what you gave me. This is what I'm going to say.
Exactly. And so we have to know that no matter how good the technology is right now or in the near future, it cannot replace humans because it can't make decisions. I think that's a really good way of putting it, Katie. The machines can't make decisions about what they're writing when they're creating content or what they're analyzing, even understanding when you feed it a big pile of text, understanding what's in there. So let's dig into how this stuff works a little bit. And we're not going to get super technical here because honestly, the tools that are out there do a lot of this behind the scenes, but it's still good to understand it because you should know it governs how you think about what you give the machines. So fundamentally, the machines do take in a text, right? This is a standard sentence. Already, we can start. Remember, the goal is this: turn words into numbers, right? So we've already got some information here, right? We've got 44 letters, we've got 9 words. It's the English language. So we can already start doing some natural language processing. That's all we're doing, is trying to turn words into numbers. Our next step is to say, what if we take this sentence and break it up into pieces, right? It's a process called tokenization. You'll hear that a lot. You'll see it in people's code when they're writing the code. You will see it in vendor brochures talking about advanced tokenization techniques. All that means is take something big and break it up. In this case, if you chose your token, your unit of analysis as a single word, you'd have 9 tokens. If you chose phrases, you'd actually have 18, because you have like the quick would be a phrase, quick brown would be a phrase, brown fox would be a phrase, and so on and so forth. And you just kind of walk through this. And then if you chose multiple words, something called n-grams, it'd be the quick brown would be 1. Quick brown fox would be number 2, and so on and so forth. And all the machine is doing is trying to break up text into the chunks that we tell it to based on things like spaces. This is why natural language processing has a really hard time with some languages like Japanese, for example, because spaces aren't necessarily going to be there. Some forms of Chinese. There are other languages where how words are broken up doesn't have a machine readable, easy way. You have to actually understand the context. And so, Katie, to your point earlier, a lot of tools, if you are a company that works internationally, a lot of tools are trained and tuned and built on the English language. And there's an expression in the language world that English is the language of the rich, right? English is the language of the wealthy countries. And so if you are doing business internationally, one of the things you have to be very careful of is that you're working with models that have been trained on more than just English.
Well, in the English language, without getting too far into a digression, is problematic.
Hot mess.
Yeah, on its own. When you think of all of the grammar rules and then the rules that break the rules, and the things that should be past tense and present tense, and things that should be plural and like, it's a mess. And so, yeah, it saddens me to know that that's how we're training these machines, because we as native English speakers can sometimes barely speak our own language because it is such a hot mess.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And there's some forms of tokenization that break words into subwords, like by certain character endings, which could be really problematic with English. Think about it. Why is it that the words naked and baked, which are spelled essentially the same way, are pronounced completely differently? But if you were to break them up into individual components, like, you would assume they're equivalent from a machine perspective. They're not equivalent. They're not pronounced the same. And they obviously have a different context. So again, you have to be real careful how these machines are trained.
It's true. Well, and, then you factor in things like, regional slang and, the way that people pronounce things based on an accent. And so, like, you have the people who say data and the people who say data. And it's not that you're trying to teach the machine how to pronounce it necessarily, but you might be. That might be part of the output that you're putting together. And so it's incredibly tricky.
It is. Like read and read, spelled exactly the same way, different meanings. So the next step after tokenization that the machines do is what's called vectorization. And all that means is we convert whatever our unit is, our token is, into numbers, unique IDs, essentially. So here we've taken the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 7, 8. And the reason for that is because the is the same token. It's the same word, right? So it's not uniquely numbered. You would assign it the same thing. And this is now how you start to get into probability, because if you're trying to predict what the next word is, if you see the in this very simple toy example, there's a probability that the word after that could be lazy, but there's also probability the word after that could be quick. Right? It could be number 2, could be number 7. And so now you're starting to understand that machines don't read, they just compute. They just predict the probability of the next number in the sequence. And so, again, to the point of, read and read, I read the book, you read to me, because that's the same token, but it has a different use case, present and past tense, the probabilities can get mixed up, right? So part of what we have to think about when we're thinking about the kind of data we need to use natural language processing, we have to give some serious thought to how we clean it, how we prepare it. To your point, Katie, about dialects, if your customers come from different regions of the country or different regions of the world, you're going to get very different use cases of English. And if you are trying to process it to understand what's in the box, or even worse, generate new language, you could start creating word salad.
That's true. I mean, just a very simple example of that. A lot of people refer to soda as pop, but pop is a noun and a verb,
yes,
and it's also an adverb, I think. And so it's a lot of different things. It's one word, and so in the wrong context, this machine is going to get very confused.
Exactly. And if you're from New York City or the South Shore, dropping an F-bomb is essentially noun, verb, adjective, punctuation. It's everything all in one.
I like how you said New York City or the South Shore, meaning me. Hey, I keep it clean when we're live.
But again, that would be one of those things where, if you think about it, if you're trying to do natural language processing for generating, like say the chatbot, do you want your chatbot to be dropping the F-bomb on customers? Maybe.
I'm gonna say no. I mean, I was debating it, but I'm gonna say no.
It depends on your brand. Like if it's part of your brand,
it kicks into beast mode when things get bad.
As long as the customer swears first.
Exactly. And tokenization and vectorization occur at the token level. And as we said, there are different kinds of tokens, right? There's the individual ones, then there are sentences, paragraphs, documents, and corpuses. And this is important because, especially if you're into SEO, because for 20 years, we thought SEO was about the token, the word, maybe the phrase. The most advanced models being used by companies like Google and stuff now operate at a much further along the spectrum. Like we think of SEO as that very first thing there, just the individual word unit. When we look at the way Google uses language, it's actually operating all the way up at the document level. Being able to say, this page that is authoritative and this page, which is new that I've never seen before, have a lot of document level similarities. So I'm going to give an authority score to this page that's relatively new that mirrors this one that I already know, because it can compare the documents at document level. And so that changes your SEO strategy from, I got to make sure I say the words, management consulting 6 times in this blog post. And it's the 2 first words in the title and stuff, to no. Does it look like an authoritative source? Does it read like something that McKinsey or Accenture wrote? Because that's how it's thinking. And what's going to happen in the next couple of years, this is where things get really hairy, is that last box in the sequence, corpus, is the collection of documents. Google announced at their I/O show this year that they've got this brand new model called the Multitask Unified Model, or MUM that they're calling it. And it's essentially an evolution from sort of document level recommendations now to corpus level, to say, okay, I'm going to look through everything I know and synthesize something and give that to you as your search result. Which means that we as marketers have to be sitting down going, what does our corpus of work look like? Katie, you and I were talking about, the content on our blog. Mm-hmm. Do we have the right content on our blog? We've been looking at pages and topics. And now we have to be thinking, does our work as a whole represent a corpus that is authoritative and similar to other things that Google would say, yep, you're an expert?
Yeah. Well, and then the question I have is, who's telling Google what things are authoritative or not? It's people. Google's not making those decisions. The AI is not saying that's authoritative, that's not. It's all fed from people saying, I've ranked this as authoritative or not. And so, it's definitely something to keep in mind. And I'm not saying that the rankings that Google have are wrong, but know that they are people managed. And so there may be some unconscious bias in there as well, because you mentioned McKinsey and Accenture. So there's a reputation and there's a perception. And I'm not picking on them, but just as an example, but are they really authoritative? And so those are the things that, as you are making your judgment of the other corpus, corpi, I don't know, plural of corpus,
Corpuses.
See, English language is hard. The other corpuses that you want to be compared to, similarly, you have to factor that in. Like, this is what Google says is authoritative, but you have to make the decision for yourself, for your brand. Who do you want to most be like, and what do you want to represent?
Yep. Actually, I guess corpus is Latin.
I know. I was thinking about corpi or corpuses.
You're correct. No, corpi would be the correct plural in Latin, because you only do the US with an S plural for Greek source words like campus. But corpus is Latin.
So tell me again how the English language should be the one that this is being trained on.
Exactly. Okay. So that's in effect more or less how the sort of the nuts and bolts of natural language processing works. Now, once you have converted everything to numbers, then you're doing math on it, right? Well, you're not doing, the machines are doing math on it. And so let's look at a couple of really simple examples of just some of the math that we do. So Katie, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a chart here that I just generated. This is the most frequent phrases in your followers on Twitter, right? So of all the people who follow, at Katie Robert, which if you don't, please go follow at Katie Robert on Twitter. You can see the handles in the on screen here. These are the bios. So this helps you understand. We used some natural language processing and kept it real simple. Said, I want 2-word phrases, I think 2 or 3 words, and then just raw numbers. How many times do we see this in all these bios? And so this gives you now an idea of who's in your audience. So what do you see, Katie? And does this resonate with the people that you interact with on a regular basis?
It does. It absolutely does. And so the pattern that I see when I start to mentally categorize these is it's primarily digital marketers, whether it's a social media content marketer, media marketer, and other co-founders, other CEOs are mostly following me. And then you have a smattering of other things. There's some data science in there, which makes sense. That's what you would want to see, since those are some of the organizations that I belong to. And then there's a couple of things that I would want to look into, such as best-selling, full service, and follow us, which to me, that's fine. But that doesn't really tell me who those people are.
Exactly. So now with this information, what would you do with this? What's the so what for you?
The so what for me is that, as I am putting out posts on social media, I want to make sure that they are, if this is the right audience for me, which I believe it is, then I want to make sure that I am putting out content that resonates with this kind of an audience, so that I'm mentioning things about social media and how what we do influences social media, how what we do influences digital marketing, and how I, as a co-founder, what my experiences are, so that I'm speaking to the audience and having similar conversations that they are, so that they feel like it's something that they see themselves in and that they want to engage with.
Makes sense. And so you probably would not publish a whole bunch of tweets about knitting.
Correct.
You could.
I could. Well, and that's the thing. If I wanted to suddenly attract social media marketers of knitting circles, if that's a thing, I'm sure it might be, then I would. But that's exactly it. I would want to find people in those demographics that would benefit the most from my services, but also that I can then learn from.
Exactly. Now, if we look at the company one, similar, but you'll see things like data science being higher up in the orders. You'll see, machine learning be higher up. Obviously, it makes sense. With your personal Twitter account would reflect more of the things you talk about. This reflects more of what the company tends to share. You do see some interesting, start seeing interesting role things like wife and mom, husband and dad, husband and father towards the bottom there. So you're starting to also see, get a sense of who the audience is. You can make the somewhat logical inference, not proven. You'd want to get some quantitative data to back it up, but probably not super young kids, right? Now, probably not immediate college graduates, probably slightly further along in their careers. So this is a real simple example of how you would use basic natural language processing to guide a strategy.
And, I've definitely seen people do this manually where they pull the list of Twitter followers and then they start to eyeball the bios to, what I was just doing was sort of mentally categorizing things. But what this has already done is it's taken it that step to categorize the data to a smaller, and then I can start to cluster rather than categorize similar terms such as social media marketer, digital marketer. Like those things all belong, at least in my brain, in the same kind of cluster of things.
Exactly. A more sophisticated example of using this is an extract of 5,000 job postings from one of our projects we did for a client, a recruiting agency for truck drivers. And we pulled all 5,000 of their job posts on Indeed.com and said, okay, let's, what are the words and phrases you're using? You can see pretty clearly, they're talking a lot about the type of commercial driver's license you have to have, the type of vehicle you would drive, your age, etc. Makes sense, right? Those are all the things you would want to, as a company, to specify. Like, this is what we're looking for in a job ad. But when we took 17,000 calls from their call center and transcribed them, what we ended up with was a very different set of conversations. What's the pay? Your starting cents per mile. What's your driving record? Are you home on the weekends? Is there a signing bonus? All sorts of things that the candidates cared about that weren't in the job ads. And when we brought this to the client, we said, okay, you're talking about one thing. Your customers are talking about another thing. You're not even dining at the same restaurant, much less the same table. You need to fix your job ads and at least answer some of these obvious questions that they just didn't get to because it was all trapped in audio format. And when they changed their job ads, they saw immediate improvement in the results. I think it was something like 40% increase in conversion for their job ads just because they were talking about the things that their customers wanted. Now, to your point, Katie, you could absolutely do this. If you just listened in to 5 or 6 calls, it probably would not have taken very long to get a sense of this. But this really helps quantify, like, big up front, you better tell somebody this is 17 cents per mile. Like, that's what this job is. So that the person can go, oh, I'm in. I'm making 16 cents a mile. That's a better deal.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense. And so you had talked about the scalability of it. And so if you are doing voice of the customer research and you're talking with a lot of customers and getting their feedback and have the audio recordings and listening to customer support calls, you as one individual person will really only be able to do a sampling of the data, which is good. But there, you don't know if you're sampling the outliers or not. That one person who said, I care about this thing, and might not represent the rest of the customers. Whereas using a more automated methodology with natural language processing, you can get to more of the data to get those more detailed insights.
Exactly. So the question that everybody has at this point is, okay, how do we do this? Right? How do you get started? Well, there's 2 different ways you can do this. If you are not necessarily technologically inclined, there are pieces of software out there that can do some level of this processing, maybe not to the extent that some of the stuff we've shown here, but you can at least do some of it. Probably the one that I know best is a company called Talkwalker. They do social media and news media monitoring, but one of the things that they do also is you can upload your own data into their system and say, this is stuff I want, the text I want analyzed, and it will make word clouds and stuff like that. But it will do a lot of that basic text mining for you. Obviously, the advantage there is you don't have to code anything. You can just upload your data, and it'll make cool visualizations for you. On the other hand, if you have a use case that is more complicated, like analyzing call center calls, you're probably going to have to either code it yourself or hire someone or an agency to code it for you, because a lot of this stuff is so new that there aren't really good commercial applications for it yet. Or if there are, they're really priced reassuringly expensive, as Tom Webster puts it.
It reminds me, and so things that are not new are word clouds. And so I want to bring up a word cloud because a lot of social listening tools provide word clouds. A lot of not social listening tools provide word clouds as an output. And a lot of people want to, this is broad strokes generalization. A lot of people want to see them in their reporting, but I just want a word cloud. Show me the word cloud. I guess I have a couple of questions. One, the word cloud's not new. So you're saying that natural language processing is a newer technology. So what's the disconnect there? And two, if I come to you, Chris, and say, I want a word cloud, but I can't tell you what I'm going to do with it, what does someone do with a word cloud? And is that going too far off topic?
No, actually, you're at the heart of data visualization, and most folks in the natural language processing space, particularly in academia, will tell you that if you ask for a word cloud, you're going to get stabbed, right?
But we're not in academia, though.
I mean, most academics, it's mostly hot air anyway. They're not really well armed. Word clouds are bad because there's no quantification. There's no sense of scale, right? The biggest word in the cloud might be 10 times or 100 times more important than the smallest word in the cloud, right? Most of them are scaled just to make it easier to read. And so they're a really bad visualization tool. They're cool. They're fun to look at. They're very meditative, like a mandala, right? You can just sit there and meditate on it. But they're not really good at drawing quantitative insights. And to your point, yes, things like counting words, old as words themselves, right? That is definitely not new. And a lot of basic tools like word clouds are just counting words. And there's a place for that. Obviously, Twitter bioanalysis, that was just counting of words, really easy. Where you start to get more complicated is when you want to start doing stuff that is beyond counting. So there is a methodology called term frequency inverse document frequency that essentially says there's a whole bunch of words in every page of text. Most of those words don't add any value. The word the or this or also doesn't really tell us anything. And so if you were to take all those words that are common to all these documents and just remove them, and then you could do a frequency count essentially of what's left that's kind of unique, that isn't just not so common. Then you're starting to get into, okay, these are the phrases that are probably more important that set this document apart. And for the last 5 years, that's been actually one of the secret weapons in SEO for more advanced SEO practitioners, is using that as a way to winnow down keyword lists and stuff. Obviously, with Google moving to its BERT model 2 years ago, that was kind of sort of their golf club to the knee of a lot of SEO folks, but it's actually still better than nothing. Where natural language processing is different than a word cloud is that you're adding more and more of these techniques in to try and understand what's happening behind the scenes, what's happening that you can't eyeball, that you wouldn't know, you would not be able to understand, because the data doesn't lend itself to that kind of analysis.
That makes sense. So then the other question I have for you is around predictive text. And so you had mentioned at the start of this conversation, one of the applications is for predictive text. Now, obviously, we're talking about large bodies of data going into, and so that the machine can learn more about predictive text. But one of the, I'll call it a game for lack of a better term on social media, is people will say, start this sentence and see what your predictive text comes up with. And it's usually just a jumble of random things that you typically say. And so can you explain a little bit about how, because we all have, cell phones, and we all, mostly have social media, and even on Gmail, predictive text is part of those services. And so can you explain a little bit about how that works and how natural language processing is a part of that or not?
Sure. So what a lot of things in that space are using is actually called an LSTM, long short-term memory. And they're predicting the next word based on the previous word. So if you remember, when we were talking about sort of the processes, a lot of that autocomplete on your phone is operating right here at the token level. So as your phone learns, because there's a lot of onboard AI in today's modern phones, it gets used to seeing certain phrases. So if you and I, for example, type the word trust, right? One of the autocomplete suggestions is going to be insights, because it's the name of our company and we use it an awful lot. It might not be for somebody else. And so what that's doing prediction wise is essentially kind of what we were talking about earlier is, okay, if I know that, on average, quick occurs after the, then when you type in the, statistically, quick is likely to be one of the logical things for it to choose. And so that's kind of what predictive text looks like at the word level. Now, what state of the art looks like these days is at the document level, right? So remember, we're talking earlier, token, sentence, paragraph, document, and corpus. This is an example. So I pulled this press release from Champion Plumbing in Oklahoma City. I have no idea who these people are. They're probably like, why are we getting random inquiries from? And what it is, I cut this press release in half. There's the first half, which is the first half of the release, and then there's the second half. And I took it and I fed it to a model called GPT-J6B, which is a generative pre-trained transformer. And what it does is, instead of trying to autocomplete by word, which is what you were doing with your phone, right? With autocomplete on your phone, it's going to try and autocomplete at the document level. And so it came up with this as the first half of this text is the bold is what was the original press release. The second half is what it created, right? And I'll make this a little bit bigger. It created bullet points saying these are ways to avoid plumbing problems. Now, it's funny, if you go back to the original release, it says kind of the same thing, but it's a lot more boring. No offense, sorry guys from Champion Plumbing, but your release was a standard press release. It was not super exciting content. The AI came up with, I think, a better press release, a better way of saying, okay, these are the things that are actually relevant, that would actually be of interest, and generated document level text. And so that's where prediction is getting really advanced now. It's getting away from what's the next word, which is computationally really easy, to what's the next sentence, what's the next paragraph, what's the next document. And where marketers, I think, will benefit pretty strongly in the next couple of years is using these tools to build first drafts, right? This is a pretty good, I would want to fact check, like, is this actually true? Are magnolias a problem when it comes to, I don't know if that's true or not. It reads like it's true, but I don't know. But this is coherent enough that you could say, okay, let's forget having, a junior account coordinator spend 70 hours writing a blog post draft, and say, okay, machine, you take the first shot, and then let's send it straight to editing. Let's send it straight to cleanup so that we can get it out the door faster. And I think there's been a lot of cases where this is good enough, right, to get started. In one of my writing groups, I actually submitted for one of the monthly contests a piece that was entirely machine written. I gave it the first 3 sentences. It completed the rest of the document. And it scored in the middle of the pack. It was not last, right, in voting. which means that it was enough that people in this group who didn't know it was machine submitted said, okay, that piece of short fiction didn't suck terribly. It wasn't like you rolled your face across the keyboard, but it wasn't the best either. But it was okay.
So let's say I'm looking for this. I'm a marketer. I need help writing the first drafts. How do I get started? Because you're showing me all these cool things that I want to have at my disposal. Like, are there things that I can buy off the shelf? Are there consultancies who do this for you that don't really just have, a bunch of underpaid content writers in the background and they're calling it AI? So how do I get started with something like this? Because this is cool.
So there's two choices here. There are vendors that do have machinery that puts together decent first drafts. One, our friends over at Market Muse are an example where their service, you can request machine generated first drafts, and then you're going to spend some time cleaning them up, but it's not bad. The other thing is, if you are technically capable of doing so, you can actually take this model that this company has published and run it in a Google laboratory environment. Google has their Colab demo environment that can do this stuff. You have to be able to read, write, and execute Python. Right, so your choice is you can buy it from a company like Market Muse. If you don't want to buy it and you have the skills, you can just run it yourself. So that would be the sort of the two forks in the road, I would say, that people have right now. These models are so new; they're like 2 months old. It will not be long before you see a whole host of vendors show up using these models, using the compute power, finding ways to make them more efficient and faster, and offering them at lower prices than the market today. But if you want to do it right now, those would be the two choices.
All right, John, you and I are out because neither of us can code in Python.
Oh, dude, I got some old school Python skills. It would take me a few days of pain to get it to work, but yeah, I'm not doing that.
You'd be better off just writing the draft yourself at that point.
Oh, I do have to chip in too after validation. Corpus is actually a neuter Latin noun, so the plural is corpora with an A.
Way to go, English language, based
Grammar
on
police.
Latin, German, and everything else.
The grammar police not going to jump on us today.
I appreciate that, John.
Very nice. I think that's a really important point, Katie. Something was said recently. You don't have to use AI if you have a human-sized problem, right? If you've got human-sized data, yeah, you're probably better off doing it yourself. If you start getting into the realm of, hey, summarize this book, summarize 10,000 tweets, then you're starting to get into the range of, yeah, you probably have a machine do it. Like, we just did a project for a client where we had to look at 6 competitors' websites. Could we have just looked at the top 10 pages on those websites? Sure, that's a human-sized problem. But we wanted to look at all 80,000 pages. That's no longer a human-sized problem.
Yeah, I think it definitely is going to be interesting to see. I mean, AI for the past few years has been and still remains to be sort of the shiny object of, I need it, I want it, get it to me yesterday. But we would always, try to slow people down in that decision making of, well, what really is the problem that you're trying to solve? And so, everything that you're describing is like, I can see people saying, that's cool, I want it yesterday. But do you really need it? Do you have people on your team who actually are decent writers? They're just not being given the opportunity to do that thing. I would venture a guess to say that's a less expensive thing at the moment than implementing AI, because implementing AI takes a lot of change management, can take a lot of software and skill sets, and it's not an inexpensive thing, especially if you can't just buy it off the shelf. And if you can buy it off the shelf, there's still a learning curve, there's still training, there's still maintenance. You have to train the AI itself. And so I think one of the caveats with all of this, Chris, is that even if you can afford to buy software off the shelf, English language is hard, you can't just plug it in and set it and forget it. There's still a lot of upkeep that goes into it, a lot of setup. And so, definitely explore your options and see what the real problem is that you're trying to solve when you're bringing AI into your teams.
Exactly. At the end of the day, if you need to apply math to a lot of data, you have something you need AI for. If you don't have a math problem, you definitely need to take that step back. So any other final comments before we roll on out of here?
Python for everyone.
All right, folks. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and our weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.